broad-based black economy. We have an indication as to what the numbers look like.
Black people who account for 90% account for no more than 30% of the economy. Easily 70%, perhaps more of the economy is owned by white people who only account for 7%. When you look at the stock exchange, in the top 50, the total value of the stock exchange currently is about 18 trillion. Black people own only 1.2%.
Welcome back to Palatable Politics, a show where we take the complexity out of politics and make it palatable for you. With me, your host, TJ Masilela. Welcome to the show. In today's session, we're going to be discussing broad-based black economic empowerment. And here to give us insight is none other than Mr Tshediso Matona, who's a commissioner of the BBBEE. He also holds an honors and a master's degree in social science, former head of National Planning Commission in the presidency, and also former CEO of Eskom. Welcome to the show, Mr. Matona.
Thank you for having me.
Can you give us a bit of insights as to who Mr. Matona is?
Well, I suppose, what remains important to me is that in 1976, during the student uprisings, I was bitten by that bug of sense of justice, by the awareness of the reality of injustice and inequality in South Africa, discrimination. And that converted me into, if you like, an activist, someone who's concerned about public issues, a generation that took upon ourselves matters that were bigger than us at the time. And in that way, I've always been interested and concerned about matters beyond my own personal, interest, social issues, the good of the country, the fact that we have a beautiful country that we need to fix, that we need to make a home for all of us. And that, I think, began my journey. So it was a transition from that era into the era of a new government, the government of the people. When I joined government right at the beginning of our democracy. And I rose through the ranks of government and to hold senior positions, head of department, several departments, director general. And of course, I tried my hand at one of the biggest state-owned companies to fix the problem of lights. Didn't last there. But I continue to invest my talents in the service of the people through government.
So you dedicated your life towards fixing the country. And one of the measures was the broad-based black economic empowerment. Can you walk us through how it came about? Why, obviously to fix, but what exactly and how?
Well, talking about fixing, when we embarked upon democracy, 1994, we had behind us decades and decades of inequality, where the majority of the population of the country had very little by way of the stake in the economy, by way of possession of any assets whatsoever, by way of experience of being in business, disadvantaged in terms of education, access to professions and all of that. And so, interestingly, the Constitution recognized that and said that there needed to be redress. The principle of equality would require that those who were behind, those who were disadvantaged, needed some form of intervention, measures, proactive measures, and that responsibility lies in the state. And so that actually is the basis of BBBEE, to level the playing field, as it were, by means of preferring the ones who are least advantaged, the ones who are excluded, to be brought into the mainstream of the economy. That's the philosophy of this. To say we come from a painful past that cannot continue in a democratic society where we're supposed to be equal, and that we needed to ensure that we achieve progressively. It was not going to be a once-off thing. It was always going to be a progressive a process, as it were. So that's really the philosophy. The legislation. So the state then created the legislation, the BBBEE in 2003, amended in 2013, and amended because we had learned some lessons along the way. And one of those lessons was that we could not just assume that there would be voluntary compliance, and that we needed to direct how compliance should look like, because it's a rules-based policy, and so we got to make sure that people abide by the rules of the policy, and hence a regulator, so to speak, in the commission was established through the amendment in 2013.
Are you able to give a picture of what it was like in 2003 when it was created, 2013 when the amendments were done, and what the picture looks like now?
The most encouraging thing that happened was that, and by the way, even before the legislation was formally enacted, major corporates in South Africa had recognized the need to offer opportunities for ownership of those businesses. So we look at the mining companies, the banks, and so on. They had offered black people shareholding, and the rest of businesses tried, various things, appointing black people into management positions and so on. So there was compliance took off, voluntary compliance at that stage, because all the law said was that black people shall be given an opportunity, and many companies did to do that. But then I think in time we realized that companies tended to go for certain prominent personalities to open doors for a few.
This is where the elite aspect
the
comes
elite,
in.
Definitely the elite, and there's actually nothing wrong, because the elite in a society tend to be a lot more close and aware of opportunities, as it were, and so the few elites were kind of included into opportunities, business opportunities, at various levels. But that was not the point. This was not a policy only for the few. This was a policy for everybody. And hence, the emphasis and inclusion of the broad-based aspect of the policy, where we are saying, let everybody who is able to participate in the economy through setting up an enterprise be given an opportunity to sell their products to big corporates, to government, and of course to overcome the challenge of the barrier of skills. Let companies put money into skilling black people, and let companies who mining companies who operate in poor communities, ensure that their activities impact positively to be part of the local economy, employ locals, and help in carrying this massive historical task, historical burden of poverty, of exclusion, of marginalization. That's not something that only the government can achieve by itself. This is going to require that the government and business to be socially aware and assist in giving people through, what used to be called corporate social investment, which is now called socioeconomic development. That all of that is important, because some of the things that companies do, and in communities, rural communities, are possibly the only investments that occur in those environments, and so it's supposed to be all-encompassing, multi-sectoral process in that way.
Do we have an indication as to what the numbers look like when it started and where we are now?
Well, unfortunately, the process of transformation, the process through which the previously excluded black people enter the economy and become part of the mainstream economy, has been slow. There's no doubt about that, and I think that's where there is a feeling that we must chuck it away in favor of something else. Let me start with the positives. As I said, there are many black small, medium enterprises today who are part of the economy, providing services and goods that would never have been there without a policy. There are black professionals who are part of management, directors of companies who would never have been there without a policy. There are black people who have shareholding, different levels of shareholding in the economy that would never have had the opportunity without the policy. But as we speak, black people, who account for 90% of the economy by the last census by Statistics South Africa, account for no more than 30% of the economy. 30 years into our democracy, which actually means that easily 70%, perhaps more, of the economy is owned by white people who only account for 7%. White people are 7% of the economy. So you can see that the disparity is enormous, and so when it is said that South Africa is the most unequal country in the world, it is borne by these numbers. 90% of the population owns less than a third of the economy. And when you look at the stock exchange, in the top 50 major companies listed on the stock exchange, black people own only 1.2% of the shares listed. And the total value of the stock exchange currently is about 18 trillion rand. So you can do the numbers. It's a minuscule. And so, the economic phase of South Africa hasn't radically changed from what it was 30 years ago. Yes, we've made headway, and we have to keep that momentum and deal with the various barriers, various challenges, various setbacks, along the way. But yeah, we still have much further to go. And so I think the interesting thing for me is, what will the future look like as we cast our eyes into the next 30 years of our democracy? The legislation is 20 years now.
Yeah.
What does 20 years of the legislation look like? I think that's where we should be looking at.
From your experience, having the insight, how much longer do we need to have a economy that reflects the demographics? We've seen 20 years. How many more years to undo the injustices?
Look, you can't put a fine, precise timeline to it.
Okay.
But I would say if we doubled our efforts, the efforts we've made over the last 20, 30 years, if we doubled, then we can halve. We don't need another 20 years. All right. You could be looking at the next 15 years. And if we could say within the next 15 years, why don't we ensure that at least 40, 50% of the economy is in the hands or controlled by Black people? That would be something to to really focus on and push hard, because I think you're right. The policy was kind of open-ended, like that. We didn't really say, these are the milestones we would reach. Typically, the BEE schemes, the transactions that are concluded in the marketplace, about 10 years at a time, and so we have reached a point where the schemes which were concluded 10 years ago are coming to an end, and many companies are looking at renewing those transactions. And what is interesting in that process is that it is no longer about prominent personalities. It's not about celebrities anymore. It's about giving workers a stake. It is about giving communities a stake through broad-based schemes, as it were.
These transactions, we've seen a number of them, number of companies. How would you break it down for layman in the streets that doesn't understand what these transactions, what do they look like, what are they, and how do they implement the transformation?
Well, the ownership transactions really were major corporates, set aside shares that would be sold because they're not offered. They are bought. To black people. That's and typically a company to be empowered would, at a minimum, have 25% black shareholding, amongst in its composition, ownership composition, as it were. So that's more or less the sort of norm. To ensure that 25% of the shares are in the hands of black people. And that 25% could be a combination of course, individuals, who can manage to get the money to buy those shares. But increasingly, we're also seeing those shares being offered to workers, to communities, and so on. So to diversify the ownership, the black ownership mix, as it were, because I think that what we have seen is that sometimes a few black individuals kind of exceedingly enriched, at the expense of the majority of us who are onlookers, outsiders, as it were. So we kind of moving away from that trend now to ensure that in the next round, as I've indicated, we are much more deliberate in ensuring that more and more enterprises are part of BEE through, for example, procurement, buying from them, supplier development, that we deliberately insert black entrepreneurs in value chains, because the supply value chains of companies, you'll be surprised, they are still closed, to black people. To be a supplier to Woolworths be a supplier to a mine, to be a supplier to a bank,
So
those opportunities are still kind of closed to black people. And so if we are more deliberate, and many companies have embraced this, to more deliberately ensure that in their value chain, there are black enterprises that are suppliers to them.
So procurement is also one of the measures that's used to transform the economy and transfer wealth, etc. Government is the biggest procurer, so that's where BBBEE and the scorecard comes in. Can you walk us through the different components of the scorecard?
I think procurement, by the way, procurement is in the Constitution. The Constitution said there shall be redress, and the state will use procurement by giving preference points, preferential recognition to black enterprises, and that is working very well. Typically, when you look at government services, be supplies of consumables, as it were, the enterprises that are typically taking those opportunities are small, medium, and enterprises. Of course, there are certain high value goods and services where you find that black people are still trying to break through. Be it sectors like ICT and that type of thing. But for a whole range of procurement of the state, typically, the suppliers are black people, and we got to keep that. We got to clean it so that we remove opportunities for corruption. Procurement is such a fantastic tool, but it has been given a bad name by corruption. And whilst corruption is a problem, I think sometimes it tends to be exaggerated at the extent to which basically all procurement of the state is corrupt. And there'll be companies who will tell you that they are now employers on the back of having the opportunity to supply government. They now
through the procurement of
procurement. Yes, exactly. They are able to employ others to service government contracts as it were. But also in the private sector. The private sector is a huge procurer between the government and the private sector. Easily the majority of all procurement, is between the government and the private sector. The private sector, as I said, are also offering opportunities for black suppliers through enterprise and supplier development. I've seen fantastic case studies of companies that started small, being given an opportunity to supply to a mine, and increasingly growing their turnover, the number of people that they employ, and being a trusted part of the business, as it were. So I'm excited about that area of BEE, because that's where you have people who actually start their own business, and they have skin in the game, so to speak. They roll up their sleeves, ensure that they deliver, because you have to deliver to the highest possible standard. There's no kind of excuse, or because you are black you can't be. We must make exception. In terms of quality of product that you supply. So at the motor industry, there are black people now who are supplying to manufacturing of vehicles, and so on and so forth. So I think that if you ask me, if we tweak the policy, is to give more recognition, more incentives to areas of BEE that encourage, Black people to set up their own enterprises, which are 100% Black owned, as opposed to kind of, asking to, for a stake shareholding.
On that, can you just highlight the levels of BEE? We've heard level 1, 2, 3, 4, etc. What are the levels and what do they represent?
Well, level 1 is a company that is 100% compliant in terms of the rules, and so it would typically be 25% or higher Black-owned company. And on the other extreme, level 8 company is a company that's non-compliant, and typically it'd be a whites-only company. The norm is for companies to be level 4. That means you have some kind of perhaps a combination of Black shareholders, Black suppliers. You support skills development, training of your employees and non-employees, giving young people opportunities to be trained so that they can have something, a skill to sell to the economy, and so on and so forth. So yeah,
those are the levels.
Yeah,
and that's based on the scorecard.
Yeah.
We've already outlined that the ownership is 25%. Management control. How do you guys measure that?
So when it comes to management control, if a company has significant Black people, significant numbers of Black people who are in their management, middle to higher management, then it gets points. So it'll get the more Black people you have in your management excellence, the more points you get. Similarly, the more you procure from Black people, the more points you get. So as I said, enterprise development, of all the total points in the scorecard, the highest points are allocated to enterprise and supplier development, and that is to emphasize the need for an ecosystem that encourages more and more enterprises to be set up, because we are only going to grow this economy and create employment by means of creating more and more enterprises.
No, on the management aspect, we've heard of companies that have someone in a corner office, manager, executive, but no one reports to them. They don't have how do we deal with that with the policy? Okay, one, is it true? And second, if it is, how do we deal with that?
Yeah, we do have anecdotes like that, and I think that in the early stages, many companies didn't know how to do this thing, how to implement BEE, what's the right thing to do, and you employ Black people for the sake of employing Black people. What we do now, when it comes to verification, so you have a verification agency that comes to look at your scorecard. They must ensure that those, and they interview them, by the way, have meaningful roles, as it were, and they're not just window dressing. I think that the phase or the era of the window dressing for BEE, I think that we have gone over that. There may still be instances of that, but you're hardly, because we introduced a system of verification annually. An accredited verifier comes, looks at the evidence, the portfolio of evidence, and then interviews. And if you say, there are 5 managers in my company, they'll interview you and see that they exist. So yes, of course, there's another what's the word, elephant in the room, which is fronting, which still happens, but it doesn't take the form of somebody sitting in a side office. I think that phase, that era has gone. Those practices are not there anymore. Besides, any company spends money paying somebody a salary does want to get something out of them, as it were. So it doesn't make sense, as it were. So, but yeah.
Okay, so we've touched the ownership management, the supply development we did in the procurement. Did I say we touched skills development? I assume that's the education, sending bursary scholarships,
education, and just upping the skills levels of your employees as a company, which is in a case in the interest of the company, as it were, to do that. Yeah.
And then the enterprise development. That's one we haven't touched. What does that look like?
Enterprise development. The cases I have seen. Here is a small women-owned business that is looking at an opportunity to supply into the retail sector, agro food. Let's say the food sector, and I'm talking about someone I saw who started small, supplying fresh produce to the Checkers, Woolworths, and that type of thing. Can't get a loan from a bank, or the cost of the loan is too prohibitive. Approaches a mining company. The mining company looks at what the lady's doing, likes what she's doing, offers her a combination of a grant and a loan. The woman is able to expand the business, and now instead of supplying, two retailers, they add Pick and Pay into the mix, and they add ShopRite, and as the business grows, is able to employ more and more people, plant more and more land, and the story is amazing. What is possible, and that blew me off. To say, why can't we massify this? This is, so we have successful models that we must spread across the economy. We have not exhausted the possibilities of what BE can do for the good of the economy, and that it also now at some point ceases to be a black thing. It becomes an economic contribution, which is what we want. And so people who are doing stuff that are helping the economy to grow, that are helping to deal with unemployment, as it were. So I'm. How
much does that contribute to the scorecard?
As I said, 40%. That's the highest.
Okay. That's the highest contributor.
The highest points allocated. Yeah.
And then implementation. We've touched fronting. We've all heard stories of domestic workers being directors, owners. How are we dealing with that? One, what's the extent of the problem, and how are we dealing with it?
So what we have seen, we've seen white businesses and white businessmen who have taken the spirit of BEE positively and have tried to do the right things, have tried to do it as the law says it must be done. And in that way, I think they have made the leap forward to the vision of a South Africa where black and white work together for the prosperity of the country. But we've also seen white people who have brought racism, basically. They are doing this thing because there are business opportunities. I want to supply that mine, but they want me to be compliant. What do I do? Okay, I will register my domestic worker, my gardener, as a director. I get this opportunity. I get paid millions, and they get nothing. And of course, as you know, the legislation to deal with that problem, which is still prevalent, criminalizes that. And so one of the functions of the commission is that we receive complaints and we investigate these complaints. And we make adverse findings against companies who abuse people like that. I mean, it's outrageous. That people can do stuff like that. And it means there's no respect. For black people that you use like that. You assault their dignity. And it's quite hurtful. When people discover that their names have been used. Without them benefiting anything. Some of them, make amends, and so they will, say, we are guilty. We admit, we will give the black person consent, what is due to them, and so we do facilitate what we call alternative dispute resolution. And it's amazing, the amounts sometimes that black people who were abused, get that is due to them, and it's due to them because the company earned money using their name, as it were. Other cases we refer to law enforcement because the law hasn't given me handcuffs to handcuff people directly, so I refer matters to South African police and the National Prosecuting Authority, the Hawks, to prosecute those matters. So we have, I think now, easily about 2,000 cases that we've referred to the law enforcement. I'm not seeing that there is any activity to take those matters to court. And that's because the law enforcement in South Africa is inundated with other priority crimes, as it were. But we also, between ourselves, National Treasury, if you are on the Central Supplier Database we blacklist you. You will never be able to do business with government, and nobody will want to do business with you. And we also publish those reports on our website. Companies that we've found to engage in criminal activity.
In one of our episodes with the CEO of CyBIB, Black Property Practitioners, she's indicating one of the challenges with BBBEE has been that they have no teeth. That you guys have no teeth, can't enforce compliance. How are we dealing with that? Well, you mentioned it now, but is there a long-term plan to give Commission powers to implement?
Well, the Commission was given certain powers. Well, it was created with an initial set of powers. I've told you, for example, we can investigate complaints. We require of companies to report to us. We require of major transactions, so any transaction of the value of 25 million and above, to be registered, so we can assess that it complies with the law, and I think the acquisition of enforcement powers for the Commission is going to evolve. All right, it's not going to be, you won't have all the powers all at once. Okay. Because the powers you have are in response to how is the market responding, where are the gaps, all right? What are people doing to circumvent the legislation, as it were, and then you acquire those powers. I believe that we are 10 years now of the amendment that created the Commission. Looking at the next 10 years, I think that we would there is a need to give the Commission additional enforcement powers, as it were. There's absolutely no doubt about that. But remember that whilst strengthening enforcement is absolutely necessary, this is not about the law. There is also the moral, the soul, of business to do right. I can tell you, as I speak, the executives of major wide corporates, they know, each of one will know what is it that they can do to offer Black people an opportunity, whether as suppliers or as directors of companies, sitting on their boards, and as management, as it were. Some of these things are within the control of what you don't need legislation to do right. So where is the soul of transformation? Where is the Ubuntu? In 1994, we said we are going to be a country based on the principle of Ubuntu. Where is that? We can't give up on that, and only think that South Africa is going to be transformed through sticks, So we need a smart combination of sticks and carrots and incentives, but also just companies doing right. And in the world right now, there's a whole shift where companies are saying, where is our conscience? Where is our social conscience? And companies are part of social justice, changing, empowering societies in which they operate. There's something called the environment, social, and governance movement, the sustainable development goals under the UN to end poverty, ensure communities have access to education, water. And many companies are signing onto those things, as it were. And in South Africa, I would like to see companies complying with transformation and transforming, because it's the right thing to do, because it's good for the economy as well. This economy is going to grow when it draws from the talents of all its citizens. Black people are 90% of the population, white people are 7% of the population. So you can see, where growth is going to come from. Growth is going to come from when Black people are more and more participate equitably and meaningfully in the economy.
Oh, thank you. We'll reach out to you again when there are developments in the legislation and regulations. But guys, in our corners, let's do what we can. Call it out where you see fronting, empower where you can, watch this episode, like, subscribe, share, and join us again next week. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thanks for the opportunity.